So now we are going to talk about what will be the future of English. So far we have discussed, okay, English is well and alive. Then we discussed why it was possible that English has obtained its global status. But now we are going to talk about how about future? Will it continue to maintain it, or is English fated to follow the footsteps of the Latin or French languages? So let's think about Latin language. Latin language was so widely used during the Roman Empire, and it continues to be widely used as a lingua franca of education up until the Renaissance time in the 16th or 17th century. Therefore, the few people had predicted that Latin language would be eventually decline and to be replaced by another language. How about French language? Yes, in 16th or 17th century, the French language was so widely respected as a language of a polite society, and it was a norm of diplomacy. So we still have such words like démarcher, détente. So how about English? How about what's the future fate of English? So it's interesting to note our textbook author, David Crystal, he provides four hindrances that can possibly limit or control or weaken the English position as a global language. So let's take a view. Let's take a look at these four hindrances that our textbook author presented. The first hindrance is the rejection of English. Some people, some countries can reject the use of English. Why? Because that's the language of their former colonial power. They have unpleasant or even bitter memory about being subjugated by colonial power, like British Empire. So they spontaneously reject the use of English. But in the case of, so we have talked about political development after World War II. There were many African countries who became independent after World War II. But interestingly, that most of these African countries, they chose English. They continue to use English as their official language. Why? Because we talked about of the multilingual setting of the African countries. In other words, there were so many different languages within the same African countries. So they need some neutral language. They need some language that can serve as a unifying bond of mediation. That was English. So that's why that African countries, they had to continue to use English languages. However, there are some rejection cases. For example, Tanzania or Malaysia, after they became independent, they decided to stop the use of English as an official language. So these are the rejection cases. And also, let's another example of the writers. And the writers, the novelists, they sometimes face the linguistic dilemma. For example, if you are a writer, then you must decide whether to write English or you should write in Korean languages. So if you write in English, that you have a benefit of having a global reach. That your English novel will be read to somebody in the US, somebody in the UK, and somebody in the Europe. Everywhere in the world can read your novel. However, but on the other hand, it also requires the sacrifice of your national identity. You are losing, weakening your national identity as a Korean. So this linguistic dilemma was faced as one of the most outstanding novelists like James Joyce. He was born in Ireland then. Maybe he wanted to keep his local identity. Maybe he had wanted to write novel in the Welsh, their own language. However, he chose to write his novels in English language, and that's why he could achieve the global fame from the as one of the most outstanding literature figure in English history. So this is the dilemma, linguistic dilemma that often face that the writers who are living in the outer circle countries. In other words, this is the dilemma for facing some the writers who are living in countries where English is spoken as a secondary language or foreign language. So we are curious, what's the conclusion of our author about this impact of rejection on the future status of English? David Christa said, okay, there are rejection cases, but the impact of rejection on the English position as a global language is insignificant enough. It's sufficient, he said, sufficiently small to influence the English status. So in another word, the impact is minimal, so we don't have to worry about this rejection can weaken the English position as the global language. So let's move on to the second hindrance. Second hindrance is wide use of regional lingua franca. So what is a regional lingua franca? We have talked about Spanish is an example of regional lingua franca. Why? Because most of the countries in Latin America, they are still using Spanish. They don't have to bother to learn English because Spanish is enough. They are doing business among themselves within the Latin America. They are trading with someone in the US, someone in the UK. They don't have to learn English. Then how about Arabic? So Arabic is still it's very widely spoken among the people in the North Africa. So they don't have to speak English as long as they are communicating with someone within the North Africa. So how about Russian? Russian is widely spoken among the people who are living the former colonies of the now extinct Soviet Union. Then they don't have to learn the English because the Russian is enough. That is a regional lingua franca. So the lingua franca is still present, and their presence of regional lingua franca is going to weaken the future status of English. So personally, I don't think so. Why? Because the economy used to be operated on a local basis, and it began to be extended to be operated on a regional basis, but now it's getting operated on a global basis. So let's take an example. For example, then, okay, even if the Mexican businessmen, they are trading with the Colombian counterparts, and now they don't have to trade with American, but someday they will have to trade with the American or European counterpart. Then they should learn English. So there will be growing demand for learning English as the economy continues to be globalized. And let's move on to the next hindrance. The third hindrance is the conflict. And our textbook indicates there is a conflict between the local identity and the intelligibility. So what does it mean? The language is an essential part of expressing our local identity. When you are speaking English, that is expressing, we are feeling our identity as Koreans. So language has to function. One is to just maintain our local identity, and the other is that we should be able to make ourselves understood when you are speaking with the people from different culture and different nations. Language has to function. So if you are talking about English, there is always a conflict between the need to keep the local identity and also the another, that is to eligibility to make ourselves understood to other people. There are two. This is the conflict. So the question is, this conflict is going to weaken the status of English as a global language? The question. So we have no clear answer to this question, but our textbook author presents an answer to this question. That is, take it and eat approach. What does it mean? Take it. Take English as it is, as a standard English, or we just take it and eat it. That means that we are taking, we should be able to use two spoken varieties of English. For example, in Singapore, there are two spoken varieties of English. One is that they are speaking standard English, and the other is they are speaking the local variety of English. In Singapore's case, the Singlish. So for example, if you are addressing the international audience and the international meeting, then you should be able to make yourself understood by speaking the standard English. On the other hand, if you are mingle with the local people and if you are trading on the traditional marketplaces, if you are talking to the Asian people like India or China, then you don't have to stick to the standard English. Then you can speak the Asian variety of English. It could be Chinese English, Chinglish, and Congolish, and Janglish. There are two versions. There are two spoken versions of English. Therefore, that textbook author indicates that English is becoming a diglossic language. Diglossic language. So diglossic is linguistic language. Diglossic means two spoken varieties of English. So now we come back to another the same question we have kept asking. That was, is there any other language that can weaken English or that can even replace the English? So in this regard, that he presents a very interesting number. So the ratio in 1960, the ratio between the native English speaking and non-native English speaking, when we are looking at the ratio, L1 speakers used to be a lot more. There used to be a lot more L1 speakers than to L2 speakers. What does it mean? There were a lot more people who were speaking English as their mother tongue than those who are speaking English as their secondary or foreign languages. So now about 6 decades have passed since then. Then interestingly, the ratio reversed. There was an interesting reversal of the ratio. Now it is 1 to 3 in favor of L2 speakers. So what does it mean? If there is one native English speakers, there are 3 non-native English speakers in the contemporary global society. So what does it mean? So the fate of future English no longer depends on the hands of native speakers like American or British or Australia, but now their fate depends more on the populous countries like India, China, Brazil, and Indonesia. This is an interesting reversal of linguistic phenomena. And finally, the final hindrance to the position of English as a world common language is fragmentation. English continues to be fragmented into a growing number of varieties of English. What does it mean? If you go to India, there is an Indian variety of English, and if you go to Japan, there is a Japanese version of variety of English. If you go to Caribbean, there is a English-based Creole, and if you go to the West Africa, there is a West Africa variety of English. There is a Creole. So English is getting so fragmented, and curiously, and the native speakers, they cannot understand the Creole. So even though Creole is based on standard English, but Americans, they need a translator if you are talking to someone who is using the Creole. That's interesting. And even more interesting is if someone is speaking Creole as their primary language, then they are counted as an L1 speaker. If they are Pidgins and they are using Pidgin as their mother tongue, then they are counted as L1 speaker. So this is interesting phenomena. So in this regard, the linguist David Gradle, he suggested an interesting number as well. He said the share of the world population which speak English as a primary language, that will drop. It used to be 8% in 1950, but it will drop to 5% by 2050. So this is amazing from the linguistic point of view. So if there is 100 English speakers, then 95 of them will be somewhere outside the Britain or America or the New Zealand or Ireland or Canada. And 95% of English-speaking people will be somewhere in India, China, Brazil, Korea, Japan, and Africa. This is an interesting reversal of English-speaking population, and it implies a lot about the future fate of English. So that we can see that a lot depends on the English future depends mostly on the hands of non-native English speakers. This is an interesting phenomenon that we are facing in the global society.